It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing dramatic. Nothing dangerous. Just a long, exhausting day for a man who carried far more responsibility than most people ever would. Judge Marcus Holloway, one of Philadelphia's most respected judicial figures, had spent the past 12 hours at Jefferson Hospital. Not in a courtroom. Not behind a bench, but sitting beside his mother's bed after heart surgery. He had watched monitors beep, watched nurses adjust 4 lines, watched his mother drift in and out of sleep, and he had waited, patiently, silently, anxiously, for the doctor to finally tell him she was stable. When the news came, relief washed over him like warm rain. His shoulders dropped for the first time all day. He could finally go home. But Marcus wasn't dressed like a judge today.
No robe, no tailored suit, no polished shoes.
Just jeans, old sneakers, and a navy blue hoodie he'd grabbed on his way out the door. He looked like any other tired, middle-aged man leaving a hospital late at night. And maybe that's where the trouble began. As he drove down Roosevelt Boulevard, the city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and red. His mind wasn't on the road. It was still in that hospital room with his mother. His BMW beeped. Low fuel. Marcus sighed. Of course. He pulled into a SoCo gas station in Abington Township, a quiet, mostly white suburb just outside the city. The place looked almost deserted. Rows of empty pumps, a flickering overhead light, the faint sound of a refrigerated soda machine humming inside the convenience store. Marcus stepped out, swiped his card, and began pumping gas. He rubbed his eyes. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, hungry, ready for nothing but silence and sleep. But fate had a different plan, because as he leaned against his car, staring at nothing in particular, he noticed something in his peripheral vision. Police cruiser, circling the lot, slow, deliberate, predatory, like a shark drawn by the scent of blood. Marcus felt a small knot tighten in his chest, the kind of instinctive tension that every black man in America knows too well. Still, he kept calm. Still, he kept pumping gas. But the cruiser circled again, and this time it stopped, right behind his BMW, blocking him in. 2 officers stepped out, hands already resting on their guns. And in that moment, the final calm moment he would have for the rest of the night, Judge Marcus Holloway had no idea that within minutes, he would be face down on concrete, handcuffed, humiliated, and fighting for rights he spent his entire career protecting. Because this was the night a judge was treated like a suspect. And this was the moment everything began. As Marcus reached for his wallet to present his judicial ID, Brennan laughed. "Brennan, sure you are. And I'm the police commissioner." Marcus barely had time to react before Brennan grabbed him, yanked his arm behind his back, and slammed him face first against his BMW. His cheek hit cold metal. His wrists twisted violently. A surge of adrenaline hit him. Not anger, not even fear, just disbelief. "Marcus, what are you doing? This is completely unnecessary." "Brennan, stop resisting." Marcus wasn't resisting. But that didn't matter. Reynolds hovered with his hand on his gun, scanning the lot, asserting dominance without saying a word. A young woman at a nearby pump froze mid-step, her phone up and recording. "Woman, is this really necessary? He's just getting gas." Reynolds barked at her without turning. "Reynolds, ma'am, stay back. This is police business." Inside the store, the gas station manager, Patel, watched in absolute shock. He rushed outside, waving his hands. "Patel, officers, please. I know this man. He's a regular customer. He's a judge." Brennan didn't even look at him. "Brennan, sir, return to the building or you'll be interfering with police business." Patel locked eyes with Marcus, terrified, helpless. Marcus spoke quickly. "Marcus, please call Diane Chin at the courthouse. Tell her what's happening." Patel nodded and backed away, hands trembling. The officers shoved Marcus into the back of the patrol car. And for the first time in years, Marcus Holloway felt powerless. The police cruiser rolled away from the gas station. Outside, The world blurred past the window in streaks of red and blue light. Inside, Brennan and Reynolds chatted casually, like they were discussing a sports game, not a man's life. Brennan. Another one claiming to be important. Reynolds. Last week it was that lady saying she was a neurosurgeon. Brennan laughed. Marcus stayed silent, staring straight ahead. He knew this game, knew the script, knew how people in his courtroom described this exact feeling. The sinking realization that your truth doesn't matter. You are whatever the officers decide you are. Right now, he was a suspect. Nothing more. The Abington Township Police Station was lit with that sickly fluorescent glow that made everyone look more tired, more guilty, more defeated. Brennan pushed Marcus forward. Brennan. Got a gas station loiterer matching the Wawa robbery suspect. Claims he's a judge. Officers snickered. The booking sergeant barely looked up. Sergeant. Name. Marcus. Marcus Holloway. I'm a judge with the Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas, and I am requesting my phone call immediately. A few officers laughed outright. The sergeant exhaled. Sergeant. Empty your pockets. Marcus. I cannot empty anything while handcuffed, and I know my rights. I am entitled to. Brennan angrily unlocked the cuffs. Brennan. There. Now empty your pockets. Marcus placed his wallet, keys, and phone onto the counter. When his judicial ID slid out of his wallet, everything changed. The room froze. The sergeant leaned in, eyes widening. Sergeant. Oh no. Reynolds swallowed hard. Brennan's face drained of color. Marcus stood tall, silent, watching the realization spread across their faces like a slow, painful infection. The sergeant finally whispered, Sergeant, get him his phone. Now. Marcus dialed one number, Diane Chin, courthouse administrator. She picked up immediately. Diane? Judge Holloway? Are you all right? His voice was calm, controlled, but edged with steel. Marcus, I've been wrongfully detained by Abington Township Police. Please notify the President Judge and Internal Affairs. Silence. Then, Diane, I'll take care of it immediately. The sergeant looked like he wanted to crawl under the building. Within 20 minutes, 2 prosecutors arrived. 3 supervisors arrived. And Internal Affairs was already on the phone. Brennan and Reynolds stood off to the side, pale, silent, sweating. Marcus watched them, not with anger, with clarity. He had seen this pattern too many times from the other side of the bench. And now, it had happened to him. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Cameras, reporters, community leaders, and Brennan and Reynolds, in suits now, not uniforms, standing nervously at the defense table. Judge Marcus Holloway entered. For the first time in his life, the courtroom stood for him, but the power dynamic had shifted forever. He approached the bench, removed his glasses, and stared directly at the 2 officers who had thrown him against his car hours earlier. His voice was calm, controlled, measured. Marcus, I recognize you both. Perhaps you should have checked my bar card before putting those handcuffs on me. The room erupted. Cameras clicked like machine gun fire. Brennan looked down. Reynolds blinked rapidly, frozen. Marcus continued. Marcus, this case is now under review by Internal Affairs. And let this be a reminder, justice does not care about uniforms, or gas stations, or hoodies. Cares about the truth. The courtroom went silent. Stone silent. Marcus lifted his gavel. Marcus, court is adjourned. Internal Affairs concluded. Brennan used unjustified force. Reynolds failed to intervene. Both ignored clear signs of wrongful detainment. Neither officer filed accurate reports. Both were suspended. One ultimately resigned. The other was demoted, stripped of patrol duties. The video recorded by the girl at the gas station went viral nationwide. Civil rights groups amplified the case. Legal scholars discussed it on panels. And the police department was forced to update its stop and detain training. Judge Holloway issued no public statements beyond one. A badge does not grant permission to profile. A robe does not grant immunity from injustice. We are all accountable. Equally. And that is how a late-night stop for gas turned into one of the most impactful police accountability cases in the region. A judge became a suspect. A routine stop became a violation. And two officers learned, painfully, that authority means nothing when it is misused. Because sometimes, the system only wakes up when the wrong person gets treated like everyone else. This is the story of the night when power kneeled, and justice finally stood up. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat. Camera crews waited outside the building. Civil rights activists sat shoulder to shoulder with retired officers, each group convinced they already knew how the story should end. But no one truly understood how deep this case had cut into the city. Judge Marcus Holloway sat in the front row, not behind the bench where he belonged, but as a witness, a victim, watching a system he had served for decades now put itself on trial. At the defense table sat officers Brenner and Daniels, their uniforms replaced with wrinkled suits, their eyes hollow, their futures hanging by a thread. Both men were charged with misconduct, unlawful detention, civil rights violations, and falsification of records. Serious charges, rare charges, the kind that departments usually bury before anyone ever sees a courtroom. But this time, nothing stayed buried. The clerk stood and read the jury's decision. The room held its breath. The city held its breath. Count 1. Unlawful detention. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniels lowered his head. Brenner's jaw clenched so tightly his teeth nearly cracked. The clerk continued. Count 2. Civil rights violations. Guilty. Cameras clicked. Hands flew to mouths. Even the judge presiding over the case paused, letting the weight of the moment settle like dust after an explosion. For decades, officers in this township had walked away with nothing more than reprimands for similar actions. But not this time. Not with a body cam. Not with a judge in cuffs. Not with the entire city watching. When the clerk reached the final charge, the courtroom fell silent in a way that felt heavy, almost sacred. Count 3. Falsifying official reports. The clerk swallowed. Looked up. Guilty. It was over. Brenner exhaled sharply, a single moment of disbelief. The realization that his badge, his career, his reputation, all of it had shattered. Daniels began to cry. The gallery erupted, half the room cheering, half in stunned outrage, and many sitting quietly, absorbing the historic weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just a verdict. This was a message, one that would echo through police departments across the state. The presiding judge raised his hand. Order. Order. The room slowly calmed. Brenner stood, trembling with anger, staring directly at Marcus. He whispered something under his breath. You ruined my life. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply replied, soft but unwavering.
No.
You ruined your own. When the judge announced sentencing, the atmosphere tightened like a pulled string. Brenner received 3 years in state prison. Daniels, who had cooperated and shown remorse, received 18 months of probation and mandatory retraining. Both were permanently barred from law enforcement. Precedent-setting ruling. A ruling that would be talked about for decades. A ruling that left the courtroom stunned. As Marcus walked out of the courthouse, microphones swarmed him. Reporters shouted, Judge Holloway, do you forgive them? Do you plan to sue the department? What does this mean for police accountability? Marcus paused, the sunlight casting a long shadow across the courthouse steps. He spoke slowly, deliberately, his voice powerful enough to silence every reporter. This was never about revenge. This was about truth, about dignity, about reminding this city, and every officer in it, that no one is above the law, and no one is beneath its protection. Flashbulbs erupted like fireworks. Behind him, the courthouse doors closed. And in that moment, the city understood. This case wasn't just about a judge who was humiliated at a gas station. It was about a system forced to confront itself, and a verdict that forever changed how it would be judged. The verdict hadn't even cooled before the city ignited. News stations ran the story on a loop. Morning talk shows debated policing standards. Civil rights groups praised the decision as a turning point. Police unions condemned it as a political hit job. But no reaction mattered more than the one from Marcus Holloway himself. The day after the verdict, Marcus agreed to a single interview, one that would air nationally. Not for fame, not for sympathy, not for revenge, but for clarity. The studio lights were bright, but Marcus's expression remained steady, deliberate. He wore his judge's suit, not the hoodie he'd been profiled in. Quiet, powerful contrast. The interviewer leaned forward. "Judge Holloway, do you believe race played a role in your arrest?" Marcus inhaled slowly. It wasn't an emotional breath. It was the breath of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind for months. The moment to speak not only for himself, but for the countless people who never got this platform. "Yes," Marcus said plainly, and pretending otherwise would be an insult to truth. He didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse, didn't dramatize. He simply stated facts. He was dressed casually. He was in a predominantly white suburb. 2 officers relied on a meaningless description. Black male, medium build, hoodie, a description that could match thousands. The interviewer pressed. "But you identified yourself as a judge. Why didn't they believe you?" Marcus looked directly into the camera. "Because they didn't want to." Around the country, millions of viewers fell silent. Marcus continued, "This wasn't about law enforcement doing their job. This was about law enforcement doing whatever they wanted. And that is the problem." He described the humiliation, the cuffs, the disbelief, the fear not of violence, but of injustice. He spoke slowly, choosing words the way surgeons choose instruments. If this happened to a sitting judge, someone who understands their rights, someone with legal authority, imagine what happens every day to people who don't. The interview lasted an hour, but it exploded across social media within minutes. Clips went viral. Hashtags were created. Protests formed in multiple cities, demanding broader police reform. Marcus hadn't intended to become a symbol. He simply told the truth. And the truth was powerful enough to shake the system. The morning after Marcus's interview, the Abington Township Police Department awoke to a nightmare. News vans surrounded the building. Protesters lined the sidewalks. Reporters demanded statements the department refused to give. Inside, every officer felt the tension. Commanders argued in closed-door meetings. Supervisors panicked. Phone lines rang nonstop with complaints, threats, and demands for accountability. What began as one arrest was now a national scandal. The state's attorney general launched a formal inquiry into the department, not a review and investigation. Dozens of prior complaints against Brenner and Daniels resurfaced. Reports previously dismissed as unsubstantiated were suddenly reopened. The truth was leaking through every crack in the system. One by one, officers stepped forward. Some reluctantly, some anonymously, some courageously. They spoke of fabricated reports, racial profiling quotas, improper stops, unlawful searches, a culture that rewarded aggression and punished restraint. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier the picture became. For the first time in decades, the department wasn't controlling the narrative. The public was. Town meetings overflowed with residents demanding reform. Some white residents defended the officers, insisting they were just doing their jobs. Others, including longtime community members of color, told story after story of being harassed, detained, or humiliated. Marcus's arrest had lit a fuse. Now the city was confronting a truth it had ignored for generations. Students marched with signs. If it happened to a judge, it can happen to anyone. Profiled at the pump. Justice for Holloway, justice for all. For the first time, Abington Township wasn't seen as a quiet suburb. It was a case study in systemic failure. Inside the department, factions formed. One group believed Brenner got what he deserved. Another blamed Marcus for ruining good officers' lives. Whispers filled the hallways. Someone leaked emails. Someone leaked bodycam footage from prior stops. Someone leaked internal memos outlining high-risk demographic targets. The chief of police resigned under pressure. 3 captains requested early retirement. A sergeant was fired for shredding documents. Documents investigators later recovered. The department wasn't just breaking apart. It was imploding. Under intense pressure and overwhelming public support, Marcus returned to his position. The applause inside the courtroom the day he walked in was unlike anything seen in that courthouse. But Marcus wasn't interested in celebratory moments. He was focused, determined, different. He handled cases with renewed fire, ensuring no defendant, guilty or innocent, faced even a fraction of the injustice he endured. Defense attorneys praised him. Prosecutors respected him. And the public saw him as something rare, a judge who had lived the experience of those he presided over. 2 weeks later, a confidential audio file surfaced online, a leaked recording of Brenner, made months before the arrest, bragging during a night shift, "Half the people we stop don't know their rights, and the ones that do, we just make something up." The recording went viral. News anchors didn't hold back. Civil rights attorneys called it textbook abuse of power. Even former officers condemned the mindset. This leak destroyed the last remaining defense for Brenner. The idea that his arrest of Marcus was an isolated misjudgment. It wasn't. It was part of a pattern. Pattern finally exposed. Marcus filed a lawsuit, not for money, not for headlines, for public record, for accountability. The suit named the officers, the chief, the township, the review board, the internal affairs unit. It exposed years of ignored complaints and misconduct. The township fought back hard. They hired high-powered attorneys, attempted to discredit Marcus, claimed he was emotionally biased. But Marcus had something they couldn't fight: evidence. Cold, clear, undeniable. Under oath, Daniels broke. He confessed everything: unlawful detentions, fabricated reports, racial targeting, pressure from supervisors, a system that rewarded fear, not fairness. His testimony shattered what little trust remained in the department. Brenner responded by calling Daniels a coward in a recorded phone call. The 2 men who once patrolled together were now enemies, each trying to save himself, each sinking the other deeper. At first, Marcus's story hardened racial lines. But as more evidence surfaced, as leaks, testimony, and past cases came to light, public opinion shifted dramatically. Even residents who originally defended the department changed their stance. Not because of politics, but because of facts. Because the truth was impossible to ignore. Marcus became a symbol, not of anger, but of accountability. A reminder that authority without integrity becomes oppression. The Department of Justice launched an official civil rights investigation. Agents arrived unannounced, confiscated files, seized servers, interviewed officers privately. The town panicked. Federal oversight was the nuclear option, the kind reserved for the most dysfunctional departments. A clear message: this goes deeper than 2 officers. Under pressure, the state reopened dozens of cases involving Brenner and Daniels. Some convictions were overturned. Others were dismissed. A few resulted in settlements. Families who never had a voice finally got one. Marcus attended the hearings quietly, not as a judge, not as a victim, but as a witness to a painful and necessary correction. A pivotal council meeting drew thousands. Marcus was invited to speak. He took the podium in silence, waiting for the applause to die down. His words were simple: accountability is not anti-police. Accountability is pro-justice. The room erupted. That one sentence became a defining quote of the entire movement. The city passed a sweeping reform package: mandatory body cams, independent oversight board, de-escalation training, anti-bias protocols, public transparency reports, expanded civilian complaint rights. For the first time in its history, the department was being rebuilt, not patched. Brenner attempted to appeal his sentence. He claimed, political bias, media pressure, unfair scrutiny. The appeals court rejected every argument. Their ruling was scathing. The defendant's actions reflect a clear abuse of power. Daniels did not appeal. He accepted his sentence and later stated he wanted to move forward and do better. Despite his strength, Marcus struggled privately. Sleepless nights, flashbacks, moments of anger he couldn't explain. He began attending therapy quietly without publicity. Not as a judge, not as a symbol, but as a man who had been humiliated, threatened, and dehumanized. A man who refused to let trauma define him. Within a year, complaints against the police dropped 48%. Community trust rose. Officers began participating in joint events with residents. A new chief, the first black chief in the town's history, took office. The department didn't become perfect, but it changed. And it changed because a single incident was not swept under the rug. A year after the verdict, Marcus appeared in one final televised interview. The interviewer asked, "Do you regret stepping forward?" Marcus smiled softly. "I regret what happened, but I don't regret standing up." "What do you hope this case teaches the country?" Marcus answered, "That accountability isn't punishment. It's protection. Protection for the public. And protection for the officers who serve with honor." Legal scholars still study the case. It became a template for training programs, reform policies, university lectures, law enforcement standards. Marcus's name appears in textbooks and law school discussions, not as a victim, but as a turning point, a catalyst, a reminder of what happens when truth is louder than excuses. 2 years later, Marcus walked into his courtroom. The same bench, the same robe, but a different man. Before beginning the day's cases, he paused, looking out at the people in the courtroom. Defendants, families, attorneys, officers. He spoke softly. "This bench is not a throne. It's a responsibility. And justice is not a privilege. It's a promise." The room fell silent. A promise. One he intended to protect for the rest of his career. Marcus sat, lifted his gavel, and whispered, "Court is now in session. Fade out."